I'm going to go right ahead and commit to not having seen these two episodes previously. I know all through the first 40, I kind of went back and forth on some, but I think I determined that I ultimately saw them all. And the Sleepy Hollow one, I think maybe I just assumed when it came up that there was a Sleepy Hollow episode of Wishbone, and that's why I had seen that one previously, but I didn't see it when it originally aired, but I'm not positive. These, the Henry IV Part 1 and the Courtship of Miles Standish episodes, I have not seen. Um, I did read The Courtship of Miles Standish, and I read it on Project Gutenberg, and I'm going to include that link in the description below so that you can read it too. It's all of the it's the whole collected works of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So you gotta click through to get to the actual poem, or you can read the whole thing. I'm not interested. Um, I'm not that great with poetry, and I don't enjoy it that much. But I did like this one, perhaps because I knew there was a wishbone at the other end. In any case, um, I started doing this thinking, well, now I've when I first saw these episodes, I hadn't read anything for the most part in my life, and now I've read at least most of what Wishbone did. So that was an interesting experiment for that reason. But I'm glad this and the Purloined Letter, the Edgar Allan Poe story. Was that the Edgar Allan Poe? No, yes, because The Scandal in Bohemia was the Sherlock Holmes story that I thought was the Purloined Letter. But, I read those things now, and I hadn't read them before, and that is an unexpected perk of having done this. So, but I don't think I'm going to read anything else new literary-wise. Maybe, though. But anyway, getting to the episodes. Henry IV, which is a play by Shakespeare, is the third Shakespeare that Wishbone has done. And it's one I haven't seen. I saw clips of it. My memories of Henry IV. There was a Lincoln Center revival when I was first getting into Broadway stuff, and Falstaff, which is the big scenery-chewing character, was played by Kevin Kline, and there were lines in the press clips that I would see and that I would memorize and imitate, and that is the extent of my knowledge of it until I watched this Wishbone episode. But I'll eventually see it. I didn't want to read it for the most part because I prefer to see plays rather than read them. And it's not like I have an individual little copy that I can read and then get rid of. I've got to take down the big red Shakespeare book and hold it on my lap for 4 hours, if not more. So, but I got a nice primer with Wishbone. The basic premise is Prince Hal, is kind of a man of the people. He's going to be king, but he doesn't really feel like a king or even a prince. He's hanging out with his friends down at the local tavern amidst the townspeople, and the townspeople love him. But his father, I believe King Henry is the name, is worried because he's more of a kings should be feared and not loved, respected but not, and revered but not friendly, and that's not what Hal is. And there's this other, not a prince, I think he's just a soldier called Hotspur, and he's more of of what a king should be, and this ultimately becomes a problem when, and I wasn't quite clear on this, but I think that Hotspur joins the rebels, like they might be Scottish rebels, that King Henry is at war with, and so if he wins, then he becomes king, and so that kind of person who's more kingly turns out to be not the best kind of person to be. And Hal ultimately, his story is rising to the occasion of defending his father's kingdom and his kingdom against this guy. But Shakespeare is long and complicated, and as good a job as Wishbone does at distilling it, I still feel like I gotta see it. Not even just read it, but see it in order to get it. The Joe story, and both of these, neither of these have much Sam in them. The latter one has more David, but the Joe story is, it's basketball season, and the team is called the Bulldogs, and Wishbone is apparently the original bulldog mascot left, so Wishbone is a dog. I guess it's the only dog that they know comes in to be the mascot, and it's cute. But Joe is possibly in high school at this point. I don't know for certain. But he wants to be team captain, and of course, Demont also wants to be team captain. And so it's kind of between them. Demont is the better shooter. I don't know if he's a better overall player, but he's the better shooter, and he's got more confidence than Joe. But when elections happen, Joe is the one who the rest of the team, even though he's not the biggest scorer, the rest of the team looks to him as more of a leader, and so Joe becomes the team captain. And of course, it's what he wanted, but he was nervous and not confident. But that's why perhaps some of them voted for him, that he wouldn't be a hot dog on the court. But then once he becomes captain, he gets what he wants, and it's big. It was always big, but now he's got it. He can actually feel the weight of it, and he gets more nervous. And of course, there's a game toward the end, and his leadership. Actually, more the coach. Actually, like Joe is leader-ish, but the coach is the one who says the thing that ultimately gets them to do what they need to do to win the game. But Joe's ready to do the right thing, whereas Demont wouldn't necessarily have been ready to do that, and they win. The term wag. The episode is called Prince of Wags, and wag is, I guess, a term for a young man, possibly a military term, but it's also a thing that a dog's tail does very famously. Let's wag another tail, as it were. So anyway, there's a final battle for Henry IV, and there's a final basketball game for Joe and his team, and David is the game announcer, which is cool. I think in the next episode it kind of demonstrates part of the reason is he knows how to hook things up. I did that for a basketball team when I was in high school. It was a middle school team, but I would set up I didn't announce, but I pushed the buttons on the board to make the numbers change, and there was a really old one that I used at one of the schools, and it didn't work very well, so the crowd would yell at me that the score is different than it is, and I wanted to write a big sign and put it in the front of the table that says, "I know the score," but I know that wouldn't have been the solution to the problem. But I always kept it in the book, what the score was, and there were other people keeping score, but not the same as being in a student movie version of one of these things, but a nice, fun anecdote. And then at the end of the episode, very, very, very nicely, Demont seems to acknowledge Joe in the victory. Like, it's not we won, but I still don't like you because that's my character. They're both happy they won. They both realize that that's the only way they could have won, and so it is. And Demont is pretty okay in the next one too. So I kind of, like, I think I said in about previous episodes, that I wondered if they were ever going to give him more nuance like they do with Nelson on The Simpsons, or if he was just going to be pure bully. And as with so many doubts that I've had over the course of watching these episodes, I shouldn't have doubted. It's PBS. It's not like it's a programming that wants to do the right thing and send the right message and be fair. So I should have given it more credit. But we'll see. There are still, 6 proper episodes, and then the hour-and-a-half long episode to go. So we'll see if any more happens with Demont at all. Nothing more has to happen with Demont. I'd be fine with that. But he seems to be coming around to being okay, which does happen with bully-type people. So the next episode, a bone of contention based on The Courtship of Miles Standish, which is a long narrative poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow that you can read at the link below. And I recommend it, even if it's completely not your thing, even if you're not a reader, because it's the same reason I used to read when Slate would publish a poem every week, and I never knew the poet. I rarely knew the poems, and I'm not that into poetry, but I would read it just for a little bit, just to get a little bit of it, a taste of it, and this is more than a little bit. But and my friends who have a YouTube channel, Atonal Hits, which I've got a link to somewhere on my homepage there, I listen to there every weekend. They have a clip, and I listen to it to get a dash of classical music. I don't listen to a lot of classical music, but I just want that little dash of it. They're mostly like two or 3 minutes long, and they're part of the reason that I read bits and pieces of literature to YouTube, to facilitate just a tiny dash of something that wouldn't necessarily be in somebody's day-to-day existence. So anyway, the story that the poem tells is of this brilliant military commander who is in love, but he doesn't have the skills to express his love to the person he's in love with. So he asks his friend, John Alden, and this is Captain Miles Standish, of course. And then John Alden is his friend, who is very literary, but also in love with Priscilla, is the person. So they're both in love with Priscilla, and it's a kind of a Cyrano de Bergerac sort of thing, except neither of them is unattractive. So John Alden goes on Miles Standish's behalf and expresses Miles Standish's wishes to woo and wed Priscilla, and Priscilla says, well, then why didn't he come himself? And why don't you speak for yourself? I think you might have something to. And so she sees through everything, and but Miles Standish accuses John Alden of not having even tried, and to pursue his own desires, and so they fall out of friendship there for a while, and then Miles Standish goes off to battle, and the episode very wisely glosses over the fact that he is going off to battle Native Americans. In fact, in the Wishbone version, he's seen like an apparent Native American hands him his weapon on their way out, so it's almost as though he's in league with them. But anyway, I read that part of the poem and I thought, oh, I hope they don't do this in the Wishbone episode, and they didn't, so that was very nice, except he is reported to be missing and dead, Miles Standish is. So John Alden and Priscilla, well, they both mourn him, but they also take the opportunity to, now there's less pressure on us, we can actually pursue what we want to pursue. And then at their wedding, Miles Standish shows up, but he shows up contrite. And he said, look, I know I did the wrong thing. I was unfair to both of you. I want you both to be happy. Even though I've just explained the plot of it, it's not the plot, it's the experience of reading the poem that I'm advocating that you read the poem for. Or, go to the Gutenberg page and read something else by Longfellow. The Joe story, and it is still very much a Joe story, but this time it's Joe and David, and Sam is just kind of there, but she's working and she's there because she's working at Pepper Pete's, which we established that her dad owns. And Wishbone is just hanging around Pepper Pete's. Wishbone just goes and does whatever he wants, which is not how dogs should be allowed to exist, at least domestic ones. Wishbone says something very wise upon being asked to fetch the mail by Pepper Pete, Sam's dad. He says, never ask a dog to fetch what you can fetch for yourself. And there's more wisdom in that, I'm sure, than a non-dog person like myself can see, but I still thought it was worth writing down and repeating on the internet. But the main thrust of the story is that Joe wants to ask a girl named Sarah to the dance. We see Demont ask Sarah to the dance, and she tells him that she wants to go alone. Joe is nervous, but he knows that David is going to be working with Sarah on audio equipment for the dance, setting things up, wires and stuff. I guess she's the one who's lending the equipment. No, she's setting up for the dance, and David is lending the equipment, maybe from the basketball team, something like that. And so they have a lot in common, and they kind of bond over working on this thing, and David is into her as well. But Joe doesn't know this. And Joe wants what Joe wants, so Joe asks David, maybe when you're, working with her on the thing, ask her if she'll go to the dance with me. And David agrees to, because he wants to be a good friend. And he does ask her, and she says the same thing. She wants to go to the dance alone. So he doesn't even ask on behalf of himself either. But he does ask on behalf of Joe. Joe later sees them kind of bonding, laughing together. Sarah has put her hand on David's shoulder while they're watching Emily, the return of Emily, David's little sister, taunt Wishbone with a cookie. And Joe walks by, sees this, and he and David are no longer friends. So it's the same thing as happens in the poem. And then they both kind of they both Joe and David kind of brood about not being friends, but David's still uh, hanging around with Sarah and having a good time. And she sits with him at the basketball game where Joe is playing and he is announcing, and she asks if she can do a little announcing. And she really gets into it. This actor, what's her name? Melissa Archer. She really goes for it. Like a lot of, it's not a Wishbone is not a showcase for acting fireworks. It's and a lot of the guest stars abide by that kind of unspoken rule, and it's not. There's not anything wrong with it, and I'm wondering Shelley Duvall is in the next episode that I'm going to watch, so I wonder how that'll go. But it's exciting. But she just really gets into it and kind of um, takes over every scene that she's in and really fills the scene in a way that, for the most part, performances in Wishbone don't. They're all part of a unit working together, and there are different kinds of acting and there are different ways that it works. But she just kind of stands out in a interesting way, especially when she's announcing and she kind of does colorful announcing like you'd hear on ESPN or Madison Square Garden TV or something like that. And David even has to kind of we don't add color to the commentary. We just say what happens. It's just, okay. But she just, because she wants to be a DJ, we find out that she wants to be a DJ, and that's why she has the equipment, and she's working with the equipment for the dance. And I don't recall exactly how they get back together. Let me see if I wrote it down. I guess Joe kind of notices that she's really into the announcing thing, and that she and David work well together. So he comes up to David. He says that he admits that he and Sarah work better together than Joe and Sarah would. There's not much of Sam. Wishbone tries to get Joe to take Sam to the dance. It's like, Sam is right there. You can just ask Sam. So I wonder if that was kind of setting up a Joe-Sam thing. But then at the end of the episode, and this is another nice moment with Demont, Demont kind of says to Joe that he was going to go with Sarah, but it didn't work out, and or something like that. And I don't think Joe quite gets it, and then Wishbone kind of nudges a basketball over to them, and they go and play horse. And so that's just a nice moment. It's not like I'm hoping that Demont becomes part of the trio, making it a quartet, but it's nice to see a maturing of that dynamic between Joe and Demont. So that's that for those episodes. The next episode features Shelley Duvall, and it's based on Great Expectations, which is the third Dickens that, let's see, Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, and Dickens. Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, and A Tale of Two Cities. So I think that's 3 Dickenses. There are 3 Shakespeares, and then later on down here there's Northanger Abbey, which is the second Jane Austen. And The Black Arrow, which is the other episode that I'll watch for Thursday, is by Robert Louis Stevenson, and let's see, he is also the author of a couple of others that Wishbone have done, more famous, the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Treasure Island. So he actually, there's a 3-way tie for most, and then Jane Austen has the ultimate win, the second place with 2, and I'll go back over and see if there's anyone else who has 2. But in the meantime, let's wag another tail.